Record. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. A little review for today's AP test. The 5 of you who have volunteered, thank you so much for doing it. I know one of you has to leave. What we want to do is just try to model here a way of reviewing for the AP, something that I believe is very powerful, very effective. I'm going to explain it to you all in a second. You've got a slide there in front of you. But something also that I can record, put up on YouTube and share with not only the other students in the class, 100 and whatever we have, who aren't here today, but to anybody else who might be interested. Here is the thinking. One of the great ways to review, one of the really great ways to review is to place yourself into the shoes of somebody else in history, a people, a group, an individual, and then see history through their eyes, as opposed to just through your own eyes. So today, what we're going to do, you can see Blacks in America, women in America, Native Americans in America. I've produced slideshows. I also have it for immigrants. I also have it for migrants. I have it for Chinese in America, Mexicans in America. I have it for trust and trust busting. These are, if you will, slideshows that cover immense numbers of years, but then allow us to see how everything connects through the eyes of whatever the topic of the slideshow is. Let's get started here. Chat box, everybody. We're going to start today by working on history of Blacks in America. This slide is just going to sit here for a while. Chat box, 1900 to 1945. Everybody, 1945 is one of the key concept dates you do need to know. Chat box, tell me, what is 1945? We're basically going to be working with this one, right? End of World War II, easy, you've all got it. Now, contextualize that for me just a little bit. Tell me something of significance that comes after World War II. 1, 2, 3 things. Anything at all after World War II. What have you got after 1940? And it doesn't necessarily have to relate to history of Blacks in America. Civil rights movement is a great answer. Anything else? How about on the international stage? This is what's nice about review. If you don't have an answer in the chat box, just so we could keep moving forward, thank you, Jaden, just give me a question mark so we can move forward. I love it. So now we're getting responses. I see Cold War. I see civil rights movement. Perfect. I see jobs were increasingly diverse and pushed past gender restriction. Yeah, even more so. So we're contextualizing it. We'll come back to more of that later. Let's now talk about prior to 1900. Anything at all you want to tell me about, just let's contextualize. How about 10, 20, 30, 40, even 50 years before? What have you got before 1900? We're working on Blacks in America during this period of time, history of African Americans. How about 1900? What have you got before? And given what we talked about the last couple of days, I mean, you would think you could just offer that right up. Yeah, absolutely, Brian. We've got the Gilded Age. And we also have the, and I like what we're saying here. So somebody says, hey, if we're talking 1877, 23 some odd years before 1900, if I did the math, we're talking the end of Reconstruction. 1877 is a date you do need to know. I've got somebody else who says, if we're talking like 10 years, it's 1890. That's a date we need to know. We said start of the Progressive Era. If we're talking start of the Progressive Era, well, that obviously then also means, as someone put here, end of the Gilded Age, end of the Gilded Age. Let me see what else you have here. It looks like we've got, and then I also have someone saying, hey, if we're talking even before that, we're getting to the Civil War because the Civil War precedes Reconstruction. Wonderful, good. So now what I'm going to do, before I click on this slide, I'm setting this all up for you. And I just realized I don't think I'm recording, am I? Yes, I am. Great. So now what I want you to do is, whoops, sorry, I'm going to back this up here for a second. There we are. Is let's do this. I want you to flood me, literally flood me with anything, words, anything and everything that you have learned about the history of Blacks in America. And we are going to go back to 1607. So from 1607 up until this 1900, flood me. Let's see how much you can do. And so I've got, first of all, slavery, obviously, keep going. And then I've got the slave trade, keep going. There were the Columbian Exchange, obviously, right? Slaves come over, things go the other direction. Slave rebellions, Civil War, keep going. I want a flood, because I mean, there should be 100 of things that you could say. Good. Overt versus covert ways of resisting. Plantations. Good. Keep going. You're doing well. Keep going. You want to think in terms of something that gets us from, say, the Constitution, 1787 up until 19. There we go. How about the Emancipation Proclamation? Keep coming with it. 3/5 compromise. Keep coming. See what else you've got. Think of some famous laws from the time of the Constitution. 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment, the Reconstruction. Very good. Look at that. Now we're getting Supreme Court cases. We've got Dred Scott and we've got Plessy versus Ferguson. We have literacy tests you're sending me. I also see poll taxes you're sending me. I see KKK you're sending me. What else have we got? Again, I'm trying to get back. Grandfather clause, excellent. Learn more about that in your AP Gov course. I don't think we spent too much time on that, but that's definitely an AP Gov course kind of term. What about any other famous laws of Congress? I don't think I've seen much mention of that. When I say laws of Congress, what laws of Congress affected African Americans, Blacks, so on? Anything? Jim Crow laws is good. Anything else? Missouri Compromise. When was that, Felix? When is the Missouri Compromise? Not sure. Good. Okay, fine. Let me put it to you this way. Is it before the Compromise of 1850, or is it after? Brian Fan? So, okay, so let's take a moment here, okay? The exact date isn't important, but certainly being able to place it in terms of these other things. Dred Scott, Plessy versus Ferguson, and so on. Everybody real quickly Google this for me. Is the Missouri Compromise, which does in fact relate to the history of Blacks in America, is that, when exactly is that, if you will? We've got 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. Anybody want to Google that? When is that? Good. So we got 1820. So we've got Missouri Compromise, 1820. We've got the Compromise of 1850. How about that? I'm seeing now KansasNebraska Act relating to the history of Blacks in America, which obviously then leads to Bleeding Kansas. The KansasNebraska Act, is that before 1820, after 1820, before the Compromise of 1850? Fine, Christian, it's after 1820. Is it after the Compromise of 1850, or is it before the so-called KansasNebraska Act? Let's see if you guys can find that one for me. And then I'm going to click on this while you're doing that. Okay. Oops, sorry. I'm going to run this all the way back to the beginning here. Let's see here. Okay, here we go. So let's go back to the chat box. Did you guys find it for me yet? It's after the Compromise of 1850. Good. So here we go. I want to show you this slide now. I've made this, I guess they're called a word salad. I'm not so sure. But I've created for you an image here with lots and lots of words. And if you think about it, this is all up to 1900, I believe. It should be up to 1900, yes. 1619, 1900. Why, by the way, why is 1619 down here? That's not a date we needed to learn. What does 1619 represent? The date we had to learn, the only date you had to learn, I believe in the 1600s, was 1607. So what's 1619? What's the significance of that? Well, all right, let's look it up. Was the Mayflower Compact in 1619? Yes or no? We're making great progress here. Let's just continue on. I looked it up. It was 1620. So what's 1619? And here's what I'm going to ask you to look up. When were slaves first brought by the British into the East Coast colonies, into those colonies that we learned so much about? When was that? British, Jaden. 1492 would be Spanish if you in fact find evidence that Columbus brought slaves over onto his boat. But what I'm talking about is his boats. But what I'm talking about is, what about the British? When were the first ever slaves brought into the English-speaking colonies? Was it 1607? Was it 1619? Could it be 1619 is the reason that this date is here? What are you guys finding? Finding not only a year, says Felix, he says he's got a month, August of 1619. Can anybody confirm, is 1619 the year that you're finding online is the year when slaves were first brought into the colonies, English speaking? Anybody confirm? Good, we got 2 or 3 confirmations here. So now let's take a look from 1619, when slaves first come into the English speaking colonies, until 1900, if you will, the first decade of the Progressive Era, the 10 years after the ending of the Gilded Age, so to speak. Gilded Age overlaps, I take that back. Where we go first Industrial Revolution into second Industrial Revolution, where, what else do I want to throw out here? A number where immigration, all these things that we've talked about, and I'm realizing I just stumbled over myself, but in the interest of time, we're going to keep moving forward. We have got here a number of terms, and look how many that you touched on, yet also look at the ones, that you didn't touch on. Again, if you put yourselves into the shoes of African Americans, you might say to yourself, oh my gosh, I missed the story of Harriet Tubman. Oh my gosh, I missed the story of sharecropping. I don't think we mentioned that. I don't think we mentioned even the word cotton or tobacco. We didn't mention the cotton gin. If you're in the shoes of African Americans and you're looking at that history, or if you can see how the conclusion can be, oh my gosh, how did you fail to mention that? Did anybody even dare say the Louisiana Purchase or the Mexican-American War and the Mexican Session? From the standpoint of the history of Blacks in America, I mean, the Louisiana Purchase was a major moment. Remember, when whites moved into that territory, they brought their slaves. For African Americans, in many ways, that was the opening of a door to increased horror. Same with the Mexican Session. And so what I'm getting at here is if you look at the wording, many of the words on here, you go, well, that was interesting. Okay, we left a lot out, but we also took care of a lot of business. And by no means is this complete. I want to show you up here too. Look, all men are created equal. Isn't it interesting? All day long, nobody has said that. Really, think about it. From the African-American standpoint, their history, if you will, what? That doesn't even register. That the Declaration of Independence, this document we spent so much time on, said all men were created equal, but really, think about it. So in any event, we're taking a look here. Now we're going to go to this next slide right here. All right, 1900 is period 7, and I've got all the key concepts here for you. And if you want to take your time and review them, fine. But I believe you already know them. You certainly know the big picture. A simple point here, it's the Progressive Era. Well, who were the progressives? Let's just review. They were people who responded essentially to three things: political corruption, the boss tweeds, and the paying off of the Gilded Age industrial titans. Or I should say, rephrase that, the industrial titans paying off the politicians, the economic stability that we talked about, the depressions that led to bank runs, and then the attempt of the government to try to deal with that, the social concerns, the extent to which immigrants were being taken advantage, child labor was being taken advantage of, et cetera, et cetera. So what were the progressives? In simple language, they were people who are responding to, if you will, the downside of the Industrial Revolution, to the problems caused by the Industrial Revolution. And who did they look to fix those problems? Well, primarily the federal government. Chat box, when we say federal government, based on what we talked about yesterday, what is the federal government? What's the best way? Whenever you see this term federal government, or, okay, and we're talking about, yes, but what is the federal government? I understand. But what is it? What makes up the federal government? Congress is one. Two, it's the Congress, it's the Supreme Court, and it's the Congress, Supreme Court, I'm seeing you, and it's the president. And so if I said to you that, phrase that to me in terms of branches, president, Congress, Supreme Court, what branches are we talking about? What branch is the president? Good, good. The executive, what branch is the Congress? Legislative, good. And what branch is the court, the Supreme Court? And the answer is the judicial. All right, so we just did a little bit of review here. We're going to go into more depth a little bit later, but let's get down to this something brand new. Now, I did not teach this when we did the progressive era. I intentionally put this off until now. And the reason is because when I found over the years that I've taught this, you guys kind of get it and you don't get it. And I wanted you to be able to get it at this moment when you've sort of seen the trees and at the same time where you had a chance to look at the forest. In other words, at the end of the year where you're reviewing and the impact of this can hit the most. Here's the point. Progressives were divided over many issues. Please don't ever say all progressives wanted the national parks. All progressives wanted prohibition. All progressives wanted women to get the right to vote. Progressives were as divided as everybody's always divided. But the point is that they were divided also on the issue of what to do, if you will, the vision for African Americans. Now, having said that, there are essentially three visions. If we talk about the beginning of the 1900s, end of the 1800s, as we go from Gilded Age to Progressive Age, first Industrial Revolution to second Industrial Revolution, Market Revolution on. When we talk about that, there are three visions for African Americans. The first one, look at the right here, Marcus Garvey. Well, what did Garvey believe in? And the answer, as you can see from the bulleted blue arrows that I've put there, first and foremost, black is beautiful. Well, that should conjure up something. That should remind you of something, of everything we talked about with the Harlem Renaissance. But look at the second bullet point. Garvey says, yeah, I'm going to agree with these people that moved to Harlem and have this cultural, if you will, awakening of sorts, but I don't agree with the move. In other words, Garvey says black is beautiful, but is calling for blacks to leave the United States and go back to Africa. Why? Because in Garvey's opinion, you can never trust, blacks should never trust that whites will give up on Plessy versus Ferguson. In other words, they will always treat blacks as inferior. They will always seek to separate them out. This was one of the visions for African Americans in the 1900s, to to let blacks go, or blacks to encourage blacks to go back to Africa. Not well said, but you get the idea. Let's flip it over now to the other side, Booker T. Washington. Look what he says. Booker T. Washington wants to achieve vocational skills rather than agitate for social equality. So he looks at Marcus Garvey and he goes, you got to be kidding me. We are not leaving the United States. There's no way we're going back to Africa. What are we going to do, says Booker T. Washington? We're going to create schools. We're going to create schools where blacks can learn to get themselves ready for integration. Booker T. Washington, 1900, 20 some odd years after Reconstruction, less than a half century so after the Civil War, freeing of the slaves, is in essence saying blacks aren't ready for integration. They don't have yet what's needed to be integrated. What they need, in essence, is some schooling. They need to live among themselves. They need to learn to work. They need to learn what is eventually going to be needed when they integrate. Look at this amazing bullet point here. So what did he call for? A submission to segregation. In essence, it's going to be okay, segregation. Don't agitate for social equality. We're not fighting for social equality right now. It's as if it's an embrace of Plessy versus Ferguson. We're not ready for it. That's Booker T. Washington. There was an AP teacher a few years ago who explained it this way. Booker T is kind of encouraging what my Italian ancestry did and what my German ancestry did, to move into ethnic enclaves where you're surrounded by people like you, to get you ready for the next step, if you will, the full integration into society. Certainly that's when my Italian ancestry, they moved in the little Italies of New York. You know, they spoke Italian, they shopped Italian stores, they ate in Italian restaurants, and they worked for Italian businesses. And then eventually it moves on, integrates. But look at the middle ground, W.E.B. Du Bois. He completely rejects Garvey, not moving to Africa. And he says to Booker T. Washington, yeah, I like your ideas of schools and community and all that, but we're going further than that. We are going to agitate for social equality. We're going to fight. There's no way we're going to submit. And what does he get to submit? What does he get to lead this fight? He creates this thing, launches this thing, National Advancement Association of Colored People, NAACP, NAACP, call it what you will, but we're going to take what Washington says, we're going to move it forward. We're definitely going to embrace Black is beautiful. What Garvey says, we're going to reject this Booker T. Washington notion of submitting to segregation, and we're certainly going to reject this notion of Black is beautiful. Let's see if you get the point. Almost any single AP test question you ever get about visions for African Americans, whether if it's multiple choice, what is always going to be the correct answer? In other words, will the correct answer be anything having to do with Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, or Marcus Garvey? Think A, think A, B, or C. What's the correct answer always going to be? Will College Board ever give you a Marcus Garvey as the correct answer is what I'm getting at. Chat box, you want to take a stab at it? Always. There's one. Where's everybody else? Oh, really? Okay. So, okay. There's two. Felix, I'm not sure what the no was for, but I think it was in response to Marcus Garvey. So, Jane, can you explain to me? So, why would you think it would be Booker T. Washington? I mean, think about it. To make Booker T. Washington a correct answer is to direct student attention to the notion of admitting to the subjugation of segregation, or submitting to segregation is the way I should have said that. So I'm really curious what your thinking is, and we'll do it maybe after we've completed this, unless you want to place it in the chat box. All right, let's go to the next step. I want to show you this. So here we go. We're into the early 1900s, and of course that brings us, all of this is reinforcement to this picture. Now, World War I. If I show you this picture, World War I, and I ask you, tell me something that's true about World War I and African Americans, what would this bit of evidence suggest if I assure you that this is a photograph of World War I soldiers? What would this image suggest is true about World War I? Let's see in the chat box. How can you tell that they fought in Europe from this, Felix? I'm curious. Or Brian, sorry. Oh, and a couple of you, okay. So I think you're absolutely correct, but what I'm getting at is, how could you tell that? And it could be correct. I was looking more along the lines, they're wearing, I see what you're saying. Okay, fine, fair. They're wearing military uniforms. What I'm getting at here is segregated units. In World War I, they are segregated. Well, basically, what allows for segregation at this period of time? Why is this even legal? Is what I'm getting at. And I'm asking you to give me the name of a Supreme Court case. What made it legal? What Supreme Court case prior to 1900 allowed for the races to be separated? And correct answer. Good, Jaden. Anybody else? I'll give you a couple choices, okay? Dred Scott, Roe v. Wade, Plessy versus Ferguson, McCullough versus Maryland, and I can't even think of another one right now. Thank you, Vine. Okay, Marbury versus Madison is where I was headed. So good, Plessy versus Ferguson is the correct answer. Now, let's do a next question. Based on what we've learned so far, this is 1900, and you wanted to find out the personal story of each of these men. What do you think would be a good educated guess based on the history that we've covered so far? What do you think these guys did prior to serving in the military? And certainly there's going to be exceptions, but the majority of them, what do you think they probably did prior to serving in the military? And one good answer is they probably worked in factories because we learned that that's what took place. What would be another good possibility? If they didn't work in factories, what might they have done prior to 1900? They might have worked as farmers. They might have worked as farmers. So let's go another step. If they lived in the South, if they lived in the South and they worked as farmers, okay, you've already given me the answer. What was that like for many of them? And I see the word sharecropping. So let's go the next step. If these soldiers, if their families decided to leave sharecropping in the South, say in the 1870s, around the time of Reconstruction, where would they have gone? Let's say you're right, these guys did some farming, but let's do this. Let's say that their families, their parents in the 1870s were farming in the South. If they decided to leave the South, what might be a good story of explaining where they went? And where north? Well, they could have gone to the factories, except that didn't exist so much because the transportation routes weren't quite there. And secondly, there weren't the same number of factories as there will be in the second industrial revolution, which is going to occur later. 1870s, we're already into it, I guess. Yeah, you're right. But here's my question. Do you have a story of African Americans who left the sharecropping of the South, went north, and it had a relative degree of success? That's my question. They went upwards left of the Appalachians. Do we have the specifics? So all of you right now, let's make sure we've got this story. That's fine, good, not sure. Let's look up quickly the word Exodusters. We've taught it, but this is what review is. Let's look up Exodusters. Where did the Exodusters come from? Where did they go? And when did this take place, first and foremost? So they come from the South, they're farmers. Where did they go? Westward, where? That's right, they went to the Kansas region. In a minute, we're going to take a look at a map. We're going to make sure we know where Kansas is. And what was a push factor? What pushed those migrants out of the South? Well, we already said sharecropping. What would have been another push factor that got them to leave the South? Was it just sharecropping? Is that it? Or was there other stuff that pushed tenant farming? And what else? Sharecropping, tenant farming, anything else? What push? That's a pull factor, Christian. I'm going to get to that in just a second. I need a push factor. What pushed them out? Said, made them go, hey, we're out of here. We're leaving. This is no good anymore. Was it just tenant farming and sharecropping, and not to try to diminish the horror of either one? KKK for sure. What else? KKK, sharecropping, tenant farming. What else? Black codes, yes, to some extent, and really a little bit earlier, but that's fine. We can get to the distinction there. I don't think College Board is going to do that, Jim Crow versus black codes. But what I'm getting at is segregation. You know, the challenges of life under segregation, the challenges of life as a result of Plessy versus Ferguson, which actually occurs after the Exodusters, but the Exodusters is a long period of time, and it includes that period. A little bit of a babble there, but here's what I want to say next up. What made it, if these guys didn't volunteer to get into World War I, then why did they get into World War I? If it wasn't a matter of choice, then what brought them in is what I'm saying. In other words, and it was a draft. So what did we learn about the World War I draft that was so different from any other draft before, and then helps us to understand a little bit more about the guys in this picture? What did we learn about this? Anybody recall? Put a question mark if you don't recall, and I'll just share right now. 1 question mark. I got somebody typing 2 question mark. Three question mark. Anybody else? The rich, oh, very nicely done, Christian. So prior to World War I, the rich, if they could find someone to go in place, they could pay in essence for a sub. World War I, that Selective Service Act that we looked at, it said, no, that isn't going to happen, at least not as a matter of law. And so something that's true about these guys is they're not, in essence, being paid off to serve as subs for rich kids who then don't have to go into war. How about if I showed you a similar kind of picture? but we swap out these uniforms and we put on World War II uniforms. Yes, no, chat box. In World War II, were blacks still segregated from whites, or in World War II, was there integration? Segregation or integration? What's your answer? World War II, 1945 ends. Segregation or integration? Good. And the answer is there's segregation. So no, segregation, it's still segregated. Good. So if I ask you, when did integration of the American armed forces occur? What would be your answer? How would you answer that question? And don't give me a specific date. I don't want that. What I want is some other kind of language. You know what I'm talking about. When did it occur? See if you can do it in a broader sense. During this or during that. When? So I think that's a nice answer, Felix. You could probably get away with during the civil rights movement or very close to it, depending on how the beginning and the end dates of the civil rights movement. After World War II is a great answer. So give me another one. If it's during the Vietnam War, great answer. Keep going. And the Vietnam War and the Korean War are examples of what? The bigger picture. They're both wars that took place during, that's what I'm looking for, the Cold War. They took place during the Cold War. Now look up real fast. When did integration of the American military occur? Now get me a year. Okay. So Christian has 1948. Brian has 1948. Keep going. And I think we've confirmed. Now let's do, that's right, Harry Truman's Executive Order 9981. And now, just as a matter, so we have it all clear, let's look up when did the civil rights movement begin? And you're going to see some variation there, but let's just see if we can get a sense of that. Does it actually go into the 40s, or do they start it with the 50s or the 60s? What are you finding there? Not that it really matters, but there, Jaden, that's a pretty good answer. Anybody else? Good. So as you can see, the research is going to suggest that the civil rights movement begins with the 1950s. Although, you know, I've seen some historians say, nah, it really begins with the president integrating the armed services, or armed forces, because why? Well, what was the civil rights movement? It was definitely the federal government, president, Congress, and courts working to fulfill the promises of Reconstruction. And what was one of the promises of Reconstruction? 14th Amendment, equal protection. Now, true, we see much, much more of that in the 50s and the 60s, but there are some historians that have linked it to this, and it really doesn't matter. Late 40s, 50s, and certainly into the 60s. Now, let's go back to the 1920s. These troops come home. World War I comes to an end, and we have something called the Harlem Renaissance. Let's look at the paintings real fast. We've done this several times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and whoops, sorry, and 5, and we back up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know what you see when you look at these paintings. I see beauty. I see great colors. I see great stories. I see celebrations of life. I don't see sadness. I love this kind of work. This one right here, I'd love to have that hanging in my house. This one right here, I don't know, most definitely. What a great piece. What was the Harlem Renaissance? Well, let's take a look at Langston Hughes. We've done this already. Let's review. We younger Negro artists who create now intend to express our individual dark-skinned selves without fear or shame. If white people aren't pleased, if they're not happy about that, whatever, it doesn't matter. We know we're beautiful. We're also ugly because that's the human nature. We're all beautiful, ugly, everything in between, right, wrong, good, bad, because no human being is perfect. So let's celebrate, said the artists of the Harlem Renaissance. Let's celebrate our culture. Okay. And so if you see long poems like this, and you see a clue, 1920s, let's say you don't remember the name Langston Hughes. but you see reference to, reference to people of color. You know that this is the Harlem Renaissance. You know the time frame before, after. You can contextualize it. You know what's going on. Same thing if you see this picture. This is beautiful. We watched the video. Millions and millions of people to this very day watch this video. That's beauty. I mean, ask yourself, what are you going to produce in your lifetime that is going to be so beautiful that people by the millions will look at it for the rest of your life? And yet, that is what the Harlem Renaissance, Bessie Smith included, other Jazz Age artists, that's what they produced. An incredible moment given the past history. And then, of course, we have this flowing into the 1920s, the story of women, flappers, and so on. By the way, we haven't done this. I want to do it as a review right now. Flappers, fun little thing here. Flappers flap, that's flapping, right? But flappers also created a real flap. Who did they create a flap with? And a flap means they really irritated some people. Well, who did they irritate? Chat box, let's do that. The women of the 20s, the so-called flappers, they flapped around. That's right, Christian. They irritated conservatives. They irritated more traditionalists. People who said, are you kidding me? What are they doing? When women do this, when they in essence say, I want to flap around like a man flaps around, I want to smoke, I want to drink, I want to cut my hair short, I want to party. When they flap around like that, then it becomes life is all about them. It's not about their husbands, it's not about their families. And when women start to think that way, the traditionalists argue, then that's the end of familyhood as we know it. It's the job of the woman, said the traditionalists, to keep all this together. But they can't keep it together is the argument if you're out into society flapping around. And so we had this struggle. We talked a lot about that, read some things, saw some things. We're just reviewing here. And let's go now here, last little bit here. If we're talking up until 1945, did you guys find out for me, everybody right now? Let's go to Exodusters, please. The Exodusters, I asked you to look it up. Where did they migrate from? Where did they migrate to? And when did they do this migration? Chat box. They migrated from the South to Kansas. Good. And when did they do this migration? At least when did they start it? Like I said, it extends over a period of time. Okay, so migrated from states along the Mississippi in the 1870s. So what's going on in America, or what's going on in the South in the 1870s? And what's the correct answer? This is shortly before the Progressive era starts. Good. And what's going on in the South? Yeah, well, good. Some degree of industrialization. These machines, true, very good to some degree. Segregation is going on in the South. Sharecropping is going on in the South. KKK is going on in the South. All right. And so what we're finding is this desire to move out here. The word I was really looking for is this is also Reconstruction, or Reconstruction is coming to an end. So is the Exodusters, yes or no, chat box, were the Exodusters an example of what is called the Great Migration? Yes or no? Everybody look at the little box, bottom left-hand chart. The Exodusters, bottom left-hand of the map, sorry. It's been a long day and this is my last period. Were the Exodusters, are they an example of the Great Migration? And the answer is no. Why not? Because they come before the Great Migration. Okay. The other thing to keep in mind, they come in the 1870s and the first Great Migration is 1915. So the thing to keep in mind is when we talk about African-American migration, we talk about two major migrations, the first and the second. In my lifetime, lately, your lifetime, we may be looking at a third. We'll talk about that in a second. But there's the first, which moves them up into the factory region of the northern states. The New Yorks, the Pennsylvanias, the Bostons, Second Industrial Revolution, factories like crazy, city life, work, 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 including Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, factory, factory, factory. After World War II, as the Second Industrial Revolution continues, if you will, what we have here is migration westward, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle. Guys, chat box. Have you heard about, did I talk about this? If there's a third migration, and some people seem to think it's happening right now, where's the migration? Where are African Americans migrating today? Does anybody know? Put a question mark if you don't know. Okay. Well, you might think still westward. Yeah. No, there's a very interesting development right now. We are finding back in the South, homes are being bought left and right. Farms are being bought left and right. And they're being bought by African Americans who today, because of this last election and the Barack Obama election, are concluding that the South is on the verge of changing significantly, and that it's going to be a better place for African Americans in the future than they can possibly imagine. That the politics is changing, and that they can return to the South. And so there's some who say that we're at the beginning of a new migration. I don't know if it's true, but I thought I would share that with you. So look at what we've done. Just one last picture here for you, okay? African Americans in our cities up to World War II, up until 1945. And I just wanted to share that with you. I just think it's a very fascinating photograph, if only because of how well dressed everybody is. And my desire to probably live in a climate where I could wear a shirt and a tie. I don't know why that somehow suits me, and a cool little hat and these coats. I just love these coats, but certainly not here in Los Angeles. That's it. That's my last slide. So the only other thing, how much time do I have left? I want to just do this for you real quickly. How much time?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay. I had needed 4, but it's okay. Did anybody mention for me a rebellion, a major slave rebellion? I just do you recall when we talk about overt and covert? Do you have those down separately? An overt resistance to slavery. Does anybody recall a famous one? We'll leave it right there and give you, oh, good. Nicely done, Christian, is the Stono. That's it all. I want to wish you a great rest of the day. Thank you for hanging with me. Oh, John Brown as well. Nicely done, Brian. Except for the, well, we'll get to that. Sorry, I've run out of time. Thank you very much for hanging with me, making this possible. I'm going to put this up on YouTube for everybody else. Wish you all a great rest of the day. Stay healthy. And I will see you tomorrow. Remember, 15-question quiz. And then we're going to do the history of women just like this. Quick, fast review, and we'll see how far we can go with it. Bye-bye all.
Bye. Thank you.
Take care.